It was one of those days when the world just moved too fast. The streets were packed with cars honking, people rushing home, and the air heavy with heat and noise. She had just finished a long shift at work and was driving home, windows down, music playing softly on the radio. Her small car wasn't fancy, but it was enough to get her around. She was tired but content, thinking only about getting home, taking a shower, and maybe making something simple for dinner. As she stopped at a red light, her eyes caught something strange in the distance. There was smoke rising, not the kind from a small fire or trash burning, but thick black smoke that made people on the sidewalk point and shout. For a moment she thought maybe it was a factory or a car overheating, but then she saw it. A car had crashed into a street pole and flames were already licking up from underneath it. Her heart skipped. The sound of people yelling hit her ears, and suddenly she wasn't thinking anymore. She pulled her car to the side, jumped out, and ran toward the smoke. The air was already hot, and the smell of burning metal and fuel made her throat sting. A few people were standing back, holding their phones up, shouting for help, but nobody was getting close. She heard someone cry out, a man's voice shouting something she couldn't make out at first. Then it became clear. "My son! My son is in there!" Her stomach dropped. She pushed through the small crowd, coughing as the smoke grew thicker. The front of the car was smashed, and the driver's side door was twisted from the impact. A man in a suit was trying desperately to pull it open, his hands covered in soot, his voice breaking as he called for his child. Inside, she could hear faint crying. She didn't hesitate.
"Step back,"
she shouted, her voice trembling but firm. She tried the back door. It was locked. The window was fogged with smoke, and she could barely see the small figure inside, trapped in a child seat. She looked around desperately for something to break the glass. The man was too panicked to think straight, his hands shaking. She grabbed a rock from the ground and smashed it against the window once, twice, until it cracked. The heat rushed out, making her eyes water, but she didn't stop. She reached in through the broken glass, unlatched the seatbelt, and pulled the crying toddler into her arms. The child's face was streaked with tears and ash. The man gasped in shock as she stumbled back, clutching the little boy tightly. Just seconds later, the front of the car erupted in a small explosion, the flames roaring higher. She turned her back to shield the child from the heat. People screamed. Someone called out that the fire trucks were coming. The man ran toward her, his face pale with fear and disbelief. He took the boy from her arms, checking every inch of him, whispering, "You're okay? You're okay?" His hands were shaking as he turned to her. You saved him." She was breathing hard, her clothes smeared with soot, her palms bleeding a little from the broken glass. She couldn't find words. All she could do was nod. The boy clung to his father's neck, still crying softly but alive. Paramedics arrived minutes later, sirens wailing through the air. They guided the man and his son to the ambulance. Someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, asking if she was hurt. She said she was fine, though her arms trembled. The man kept looking at her like he wanted to say something more, but the medics were rushing him to get checked out. Before he left, he turned back and caught her eyes for just a moment. It was the kind of look that said everything words couldn't. Gratitude, shock, something deeper, unspoken. As the ambulance drove away, she stood there quietly, surrounded by curious onlookers and flashing lights. She didn't want to stay for interviews or attention. She slipped away while everyone was distracted, walking back to her old car, her heart still pounding in her chest. When she finally sat behind the wheel, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She looked at herself in the mirror, ash on her face, a small cut near her wrist, eyes wide with disbelief. It didn't feel real. She started the engine and drove home in silence, every sound muffled by what she had just seen. That night, she lay in bed replaying the whole scene again and again. The sound of glass breaking, the heat, the crying child, the man's face. She hadn't even asked his name. She didn't know who he was or why that expensive car had been there. All she knew was that she'd acted on instinct, and that instinct had saved a life. The next morning, her phone buzzed with messages. Her coworker sent her a link to a news video. She opened it and her stomach flipped. There she was, a blurry figure in the background of a news clip, holding a small child while flames burned behind her. Reporters were calling it a miracle rescue. The story was spreading fast. They said the man involved was one of the most influential businessmen in the city, Someone people often saw on TV but never up close. They talked about his empire, his fortune, his cold image. And now there were headlines about his son's near-death experience and the mysterious woman who saved him. She turned the video off. The attention made her uneasy. She wasn't used to cameras or fame. She just wanted to go to work, live quietly, and move on. But deep down, she wondered if the man had found out who she was. At work, people kept whispering. Her boss asked if she was the woman from the video, but she denied it politely, not wanting the spotlight. Still, there was a strange feeling inside her. Not fear, but curiosity. She thought about that look he gave her before the ambulance left, the one that seemed to hold something more than gratitude. For the next few days, life seemed to go back to normal. She took the bus to work, helped out at the community center in the evenings, and tried to forget. But she didn't know that somewhere across the city, the man she had saved was losing sleep, too. He couldn't stop thinking about her. The woman who had risked her life to save his child when others only stood and watched. He had everything money could buy, but in that one moment he realized how powerless he had been. Her courage had done what all his wealth and strength couldn't. He wanted to thank her properly, not just with words, but in a way that truly showed what her act meant to him. Yet no one knew who she was. The police had her description, but she'd left before they could take her name. Reporters called her the unknown hero. He spent hours watching the news footage, pausing at the blurry frame of her face, trying to find clues. He sent people to ask around the area where the crash happened, but there were no clear leads. All he knew was the way she looked at his son, not with fear or pity, but pure care. That image haunted him in the best way possible. Meanwhile, she continued her quiet routine, unaware of his search. She started noticing small bruises healing on her arms, reminders of that day. Sometimes when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the heat of the fire, the weight of the child in her arms. But she also felt something else, a strange sense of peace, like she had done exactly what she was meant to do. One evening, after finishing work, she walked past a newspaper stand. Her eyes landed on the front page, a photo of the man holding his son, smiling for the first time since the accident. The headline read, "Business Tycoon Speaks About the Woman Who Saved His Son." She stopped and read his words printed below. He had told the reporters, "If she's listening, I just want her to know. I owe her more than I can ever repay." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to feel. Pride, embarrassment, maybe a bit of warmth. She didn't want anything from him, but hearing those words made her eyes sting a little. She whispered softly to herself, "He doesn't owe me anything." But fate had other plans, because that very night as she walked home through the quiet street, a black car slowed down beside her. The window rolled down and a man stepped out, dressed simply, not like someone powerful or famous. For a second, she didn't recognize him. Then she saw his face in the glow of the streetlight, the same one she'd seen that day, covered in soot and tears. He looked at her with disbelief, like he'd been searching for a ghost and finally found it. "It's you," he said quietly, almost like he was afraid she'd disappear if he spoke too loud. She froze, unsure what to say. The wind brushed past, carrying the faint hum of city sounds. "I've been trying to find you," he continued, his voice gentle but filled with emotion. "You saved my son. You saved my whole world." She didn't know how to respond. She just looked at him. This man who had everything, standing there as if he owed her his life. "I didn't do anything special," she finally whispered. "Anyone would have done the same." He shook his head. "No, they didn't, but you did." The silence between them said more than words could. Neither of them knew it yet. But that meeting, that one quiet moment on a dim street, was the beginning of something that would change both of their lives forever. He couldn't get her face out of his mind. The woman who had appeared out of nowhere, who had risked everything without hesitation, had vanished just as quickly as she came. He'd seen courage before, in boardrooms and people fighting for business deals, but not like that. Not the kind that comes from the heart, with no thought of reward or recognition. After the accident, reporters filled his driveway for days, waiting to hear from him. But every time they asked about the mystery woman, he could only shake his head. "I don't know who she is," he said truthfully, "but I will find her." He meant it. For the first few days, his son wouldn't let go of him. The little boy would wake up in the middle of the night crying, remembering the smoke and the heat, and every time he would hold his son close and whisper, You're safe now. You're safe because someone brave was there. He had always been known as a man of control, calm, calculating, and always in charge. But now, for the first time, he felt powerless. He wanted to thank the woman properly, to look her in the eyes and tell her what her act meant. But she had simply disappeared. He sent his people to check the area of the crash. They asked shop owners, bus drivers, street vendors, anyone who might have seen her. A few said they saw a young woman with dark hair, wearing a plain shirt and jeans, leaving quietly before the cameras arrived. That was all. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him to start looking. Days turned into a week. Work piled up on his desk, but he couldn't focus. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the smoke, her hands bleeding, holding his son. He tried to forget, but something inside him wouldn't let go. Then one evening, his assistant brought him a small clue. A traffic camera from the nearby street had caught her car leaving the scene. The plate number was barely visible, but after checking through a dozen frames, they found it. Within hours, they traced it to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. He didn't send anyone else. He went himself. The neighborhood was quiet, simple. Kids played outside. The houses were small but tidy. He parked his black car near the corner and walked slowly until he found the same car. Scratched, a little old, but instantly familiar. It was hers. He stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. He wasn't used to knocking on strangers' doors. In his world, people usually came to him. But this was different. He owed her something far beyond money or favors. He took a deep breath and knocked. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in shock. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked the same as that day, calm, simple, and real. He could see the faint marks on her arms, healed but still visible. "I didn't think you'd actually find me," she said quietly. "I had to," he replied. "I needed to thank you in person." She smiled politely but seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "You already thanked me that day." "That's enough." "It's not," he said. "You saved my son's life. You saved mine too. I don't think I can ever repay that." "I wasn't looking for repayment," she said softly. "I just did what anyone should do." He studied her for a moment. Her tone was humble, almost shy, but there was strength behind it. She wasn't used to praise, and she clearly didn't want to be treated like a hero. Still, he couldn't just walk away. "At least let me do something for you." "Anything you need. A new car, a better place to live, just say it." She shook her head firmly. "I don't need anything, really. I'm just glad your little boy is okay." He could tell she meant it. There was no trace of pride or hidden agenda in her voice. It was strange. He was surrounded by people who always wanted something from him, yet here was someone who wanted nothing. That, more than anything, left him speechless. He looked around her small home, clean but worn, the furniture old but well kept. It was a world completely different from his. He felt out of place standing there in his expensive clothes, surrounded by the quiet of her simple life. "Can I at least know your name?" he asked finally. She hesitated for a moment, then told him. The name was gentle, fitting her personality perfectly. He repeated it once under his breath, like he didn't want to forget it. They talked for a little while. She told him she worked at a community center, helping children after school. It wasn't much money, she said, but it made her happy. He listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't done with anyone in years. Before he left, she handed him a small bottle of water and smiled. "For the drive," she said simply. That small act of kindness felt more genuine than any luxury gift he had ever received. When he got back into his car, he sat in silence for a long time. He realized he didn't just feel grateful. He felt something else, something deeper. She had reminded him of something he'd forgotten long ago, what it meant to care without expecting anything in return. The next few days, he couldn't stay away from that thought. He sent donations anonymously to her community center, new books, art supplies, a small playground renovation. She didn't know where it came from, but she was overjoyed. He watched from a distance, not wanting to intrude, but somehow drawn to her world. Weeks passed, and one afternoon, he visited the center under the excuse of seeing how his donations were used. The children ran around laughing, and she was there, kneeling beside a little girl, helping her draw. When she saw him, surprise flickered across her face, followed by a faint smile. "You came," she said. "I wanted to see the place," he replied. "It's peaceful here," she nodded. "It's the kids. They make everything feel lighter." He walked around, watching how she interacted with them, patient, gentle, always smiling. It was a side of life he hadn't seen in a long time. In his world, everything was about numbers, deals, and deadlines. But here, everything was about connection. As the sun began to set, he found himself sitting outside watching her pack up the toys. "You must really love what you do," he said. "I do," she answered. "It's not easy, but it's honest work. And it reminds me that small things still matter." He nodded, thinking about how different their worlds were. For her, happiness came from simple things. For him, it had always been about success, power, and control. But at that moment, he wasn't sure which world truly mattered more. Before he left, she thanked him for visiting. "The kids were so happy to have new things," she said warmly. "Whoever donated them, tell them thank you." He smiled faintly. "I'll pass it on," he said, even though they both knew the truth. From that day on, he began visiting more often, sometimes bringing his son along. The boy loved the center, especially when she was around. She treated him like any other child, not the son of a rich man, and that made the little boy laugh in a way his father hadn't heard in years. It became a quiet routine. He would stop by after work, pretending it was to check on the projects or to drop off supplies. But deep down he knew it was more than that. There was something about her presence that calmed him. She, on the other hand, was cautious. She didn't fully understand why a man of his status kept showing up at her small center. She appreciated his kindness but feared it might draw attention she didn't want. Still, whenever he was there, the air around her felt different, warmer, lighter. One evening, as they locked up the center, he offered to walk her home. The streets were quiet, painted orange by the setting sun. They talked about life, small things, dreams, and regrets. She told him about her mother, who taught her to always help others no matter what. He shared that he had lost his wife years ago, and that pain had made him colder than he realized. She listened without judgment. And for the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a businessman, not as a powerful figure, but as a human being. When they reached her door, she smiled softly. "You don't have to keep coming, you know. The kids will be fine." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Maybe I come because I need to." Their eyes met for a moment that felt longer than it should have. Then she looked away, gently saying goodnight. That night he couldn't sleep. He knew it wasn't just gratitude anymore. Something deeper had begun, something unexpected, something he didn't fully understand. And somewhere in her quiet apartment she lay awake too, wondering why his visits made her heart feel uneasy in a way that wasn't unpleasant. She told herself it was just kindness, just friendship. But deep down she knew that wasn't entirely true. Neither of them planned it. Neither of them expected it. But the bond that started with a rescue was slowly turning into something much stronger. Something that neither power nor simplicity could control. Days turned into weeks, and their connection started to grow in ways neither of them had expected. What began as gratitude slowly turned into something gentler, something that lived quietly between their conversations and small moments. He found excuses to visit the community center more often, though he always told himself it was for his son. Deep down, he knew that wasn't the only reason. Each time he walked through the doors, she would look up with that same warm smile. It wasn't a forced smile, not one of those polite expressions people gave him at business meetings. It was simple and real, and for some reason it always made his day a little brighter. His son adored her. Every time she crouched to his level, laughing as they built blocks or painted together, the boy's face lit up in a way he hadn't seen since before the accident. It made him realize something. The woman who had saved his child's life was now saving something else too, something inside him that had been silent for a long time. He started staying longer after the center closed, helping her clean up, stacking chairs, or carrying boxes. She would laugh softly and tell him he didn't need to, but he always said, "I like being useful for once." They would end up talking afterward, about small things, about life, about how different their worlds were. One evening, while wiping paint off the tables, he asked, "Why do you do all this?" "You could have found an easier job," she smiled faintly. "Because I know what it's like to need help and not have anyone around. I guess I just don't want anyone else to feel that way." He didn't say anything for a moment. Her words hit deeper than she probably realized. He'd built his empire on numbers and negotiations, but somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten how it felt to help without expecting something back. Sometimes, he'd catch himself watching her when she didn't notice, the way she tied her hair up when she got busy, or how she'd hum softly while sorting papers. It wasn't romantic at first. It was admiration. She was everything his world lacked. Calm, kind, unshaken by power or wealth. But slowly admiration turned into something else. He started thinking about her when he wasn't there, wondering what she was doing, if she was safe, if she ever thought about him too. She tried to keep things professional, though she felt it too, the unspoken closeness that grew every day. Whenever he smiled or called her name softly, something fluttered inside her chest. But she reminded herself that he came from a world she didn't belong to. Rumors began to spread before long. People noticed how often he visited the center, how he stayed long after everyone left. Some whispered behind her back, saying she was only kind to him because of who he was. She ignored it, but deep down it hurt. She didn't want people to think she was chasing someone's status. He noticed the whispers too. One day he overheard two of his business partners making sly comments about his new charity friend. He felt anger rising in his chest, but didn't react. He knew his world was built on appearances. People loved to talk. That evening, when he went to see her, she seemed quieter than usual. She greeted him politely but didn't look him in the eye. The children had already gone home and she was tidying up the shelves. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired," but he could tell there was more. He walked closer. "You've been avoiding me." She sighed and set down a box. "People are talking," she said softly. "About us? About why you're always here. I don't want any trouble for you." "Or for me," he frowned. "You think I care what they say?" "You should," she replied. "Your world listens to gossip. Mine doesn't." He looked at her for a long moment. "I come here because I want to, not because of what people think. You saved my son, and somehow you saved a part of me too. I'm not walking away because of whispers." Her eyes softened. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to believe him, but part of her was afraid. She wasn't used to attention, especially from someone like him. Over the next few days, things were quiet between them. He gave her space, but it was hard. Every time he saw something that reminded him of her, a child laughing, a small act of kindness, he felt that same pull. One evening it started to rain heavily. The sky turned gray and the streets glistened with water. He was leaving a meeting when he remembered she'd said she had to walk home that night, because her car was in the shop. Without thinking, he grabbed his coat and drove toward the community center. When he arrived, the lights were off, but she was still there, sitting by the window, waiting for the rain to stop. She looked surprised when she saw him. "You'll get drenched out here," he said, stepping inside. She laughed softly. "It's just rain." "I'll be fine." He shook his head. "Come on, I'll drive you home." She hesitated. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "I want to." They ran through the rain together, laughing as water splashed around their feet. By the time they got in the car, both were soaked, their hair dripping. It was one of those rare, light-hearted moments where nothing else mattered. As he drove, the sound of rain filled the silence between them. She turned to look at him. "You really didn't have to come all the way here." He smiled faintly. "I couldn't stop thinking about you sitting alone here." It didn't feel right. She looked away, her cheeks warm. "You make things complicated," she whispered, almost too quietly. He glanced at her. "Do I?" "Yes," she said. "Because I don't know what this is. I don't know what we're doing." He slowed the car slightly. "Maybe it doesn't have to be defined right now. Maybe it's just something good." The car grew quiet again, the rain still drumming softly on the windows. She didn't reply, but she didn't disagree either. When they reached her street, he pulled over and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither moved. The air felt different, heavy, uncertain, yet full of something unspoken. She turned to him slowly. "Thank you," she said. He smiled. "For what?" "For not treating me differently," she said. "Most people either look down on me or act like I owe them something. You just talk to me." He looked into her eyes, his voice calm but sincere. "You don't owe me anything. I'm the one who's lucky you were there that day." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. She just nodded and reached for the door handle. Before she stepped out, she turned back once more. "Good night," she whispered. He watched her walk through the rain until she disappeared inside her small house. That night, he couldn't sleep again. He kept replaying her words, her voice, the look in her eyes. He didn't know what was happening, But he knew it was something real, something worth holding on to. The next morning, he found himself at the community center earlier than usual. She was already there, setting up for the day. When she saw him, she smiled. "You're early." He handed her a cup of coffee. "I thought you might need this." She laughed softly. "You really shouldn't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Being too kind. It makes it hard to forget you," she said, half joking but not really. He looked at her for a moment, his smile fading into something softer. "Then don't forget me." Her heart skipped. She turned away, pretending to organize some papers, but he could tell she was hiding a shy smile. From that day on, things changed. They didn't need to say much. Their actions spoke louder. He would visit often, bring lunch sometimes, help her with repairs around the center. She would tease him about not knowing how to hold a paintbrush or how out of place he looked in casual clothes. But behind the laughter, something deeper grew. Trust, care, and something that neither of them dared to name yet. Still, deep down, they both knew the world outside wouldn't understand. He was a man known for power. She was a woman who lived simply. People would judge, question, maybe even try to tear them apart. But for now, in their small corner of the world, things felt right. Sometimes life brings people together in strange ways. One act of courage can turn into a lifetime of change. And though neither of them knew where their story was heading, they both felt it. That unshakable connection that had started in the fire and was now quietly turning into something like love. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the woman and the man grew stronger than either of them expected. What started as gratitude had quietly become something deeper, something that neither of them had planned for. She still worked at the small community center, helping children and families who struggled to make ends meet. He, on the other hand, was still busy managing his large business empire, always surrounded by people, cameras, and responsibilities. But no matter how busy he became, he always found time to stop by, sometimes with his little son, sometimes just to see her for a few minutes. He would bring boxes of toys for the kids, books for the small library, or sometimes just snacks for everyone. The children loved him because he laughed with them and played even in his fine clothes. The woman often stood at a distance watching him, realizing how much he had changed. The cold, serious man she had met that day near the burning car now smiled easily, laughed freely, and seemed to breathe lighter. But the world around them was beginning to take notice. His visits to the community center were now being whispered about. People began to ask questions. Why a man of his wealth and influence was spending time in a modest neighborhood with a woman who had no social status or connections. Some even hinted at gossip, twisting their friendship into something scandalous. She could feel the stares when she walked down the street, the way some people whispered behind her back. One afternoon, she overheard two women talking outside the center. They didn't know she was there. "I heard he's been visiting that woman a lot," one of them said. "You really think someone like him would be interested in her? There must be something else going on." "Maybe she's after his money," the other said with a smirk. These rich men are always an easy target for sympathy. Her heart sank. She had never thought about his wealth or his name. She only saw him as a father who loved his child and as a man who had shown kindness beyond what she expected. That night she went home and sat in silence, her mind filled with questions she had never asked herself before. Was she unknowingly making his life more complicated? Was her presence putting him in a difficult position? The next day, when he arrived with his son, she was quieter than usual. He noticed right away. "You're not smiling today," he said softly as his little boy ran off to play. She forced a smile. "Just tired, that's all." He didn't believe her. "Is someone bothering you?" he asked, his tone changing. She shook her head. "No, it's just, maybe you shouldn't come here so often. People are starting to talk." He looked at her, confused. "Talk about what?" "You know what I mean," she said, looking down. "They don't understand our friendship. They think I'm taking advantage of you." He took a step closer. "You saved my son's life. You've done nothing wrong. Let them talk. It's not that simple," she whispered. "You have a name to protect. People will twist the truth. I don't want to be the reason anyone questions your reputation." He stayed silent for a moment. Then he said, "You think I care about what people say? For years I lived in a world where everything was about image, but since the day I met you, I've stopped caring about that. You taught me what really matters." She looked up at him, her eyes soft but unsure. "And what if they hurt you because of me?" He smiled sadly. They already did once when I almost lost my son. Nothing else compares to that fear. Despite his words, the pressure around him was growing. At business meetings, his associates made subtle comments. "You've been distracted lately," one of them said during a board discussion. "People are talking. Spending time in that area doesn't look good for a man in your position." He clenched his jaw but stayed calm. "I spend time where I find meaning," he replied simply. But behind closed doors, the whispers became louder. His family was not pleased either. His older sister, who had always managed the family's public image, came to see him one evening. "She seems like a good woman," she said carefully. "But you must understand how this looks. You have responsibilities and people notice everything you do. If you continue like this, it could affect your business and your name." He sighed. "You sound like everyone else." "Because we all want to protect you," she said softly. "Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." He didn't argue, but her words stayed in his mind. The next few days, he avoided visiting the center. He told himself it was temporary, that he just needed time to let things calm down. But as the days passed, he felt emptier. He missed the laughter of the children, the warmth of her smile, and the simple peace that surrounded her world. Meanwhile, she noticed his absence immediately. The children kept asking when he would come again. "Is he busy?" they asked innocently. She only smiled and said, "Yes, maybe just busy." But deep inside, she felt a strange ache. She told herself she was doing the right thing by staying away from his world. He belonged to a life of power and luxury. She was from a simple life that ran on compassion and hard work. A week later, she received a visit she didn't expect. It was one of his assistants who handed her a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, "You were right. Sometimes the world doesn't understand what is pure. But I want you to know that your presence brought light into a life that had forgotten what peace feels like. Take care of yourself, and thank you for reminding me what matters." Her hands trembled as she read the words. It felt like a goodbye. She didn't know whether to cry or to be proud that she had done the right thing. That night, she sat by her window, remembering the first time she met him, the fear in his eyes and the relief when she handed him his son. She whispered to herself, "Maybe that's all it was meant to be." But life has its own way of testing the heart. A few weeks later, while she was finishing her work at the center, she heard a small voice calling her name. When she turned around, it was his son, holding a small toy car and smiling widely. The boy ran into her arms and she looked up to see him standing near the doorway. He looked different, tired, thoughtful, but with a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen before. She stood frozen, unsure of what to say. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally. "I couldn't stay away any longer," he replied quietly. "Every day I tried to convince myself that staying apart was the right thing. But I can't keep pretending." She looked down, trying to hide her emotions. "People will talk again." "Let them," he said simply. "They've talked all my life. For once I want to do something because it feels right, not because it looks right." His words struck something deep inside her. She had spent weeks convincing herself that their worlds could never blend. But now, looking at him and his son standing there, she realized that love wasn't about matching lives. It was about understanding hearts. The boy ran back to him, tugging on his hand. "Can we stay, Papa?" he asked sweetly. He smiled and looked at her. "Can we?" Her heart softened completely. She nodded, unable to speak. That afternoon, they stayed at the center for hours. He helped her arrange books, fix a broken shelf, and even played soccer with the kids in the yard. Laughter filled the place again, and for the first time in weeks, everything felt right. But deep down, both of them knew there were still challenges waiting outside those walls. When the sun began to set, he turned to her and said quietly, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I don't want to live it pretending I don't care." She looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "Then don't. Just promise me one thing, don't let the world change who you've become." He smiled. "Only if you promise not to hide from it." They stood there in silence for a moment, watching the children play. The sky above them was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, as if the world itself had calmed down just for them. Though they didn't say it aloud, both of them knew this was only the beginning of another test, a test of patience, faith, and love that would have to survive the noise of the world. And as he drove away that evening, his son waving from the back seat, she watched until the car disappeared around the corner. She smiled faintly. whispering to herself. Maybe love doesn't need permission, it just needs courage. Days had passed since that warm afternoon at the community center. Life was slowly settling back into rhythm, but neither of them could ignore the pull that had grown between them. She had gone back to her simple routines, teaching the children, organizing small events, and helping families who came in need. But there was something different now. The quiet moments felt heavier, like something important was missing. He had also returned to his office, his meetings, his constant deadlines, and the world that never seemed to rest. Yet every evening when he looked at the framed photo of his son smiling, his thoughts drifted to her. The woman who had stepped into a burning car without thinking of herself. The woman who had reminded him that kindness was still real. One evening, his son tugged on his sleeve while he was working. "Papa," the little boy said softly, "when can we see her again?" He paused, setting aside his papers. "You miss her too?" he asked. The boy nodded with a smile. "She makes everything happy." Those simple words struck him more deeply than any business deal or award ever had. He realized that every reason he had used to stay away, reputation, status, fear, all of it seemed small compared to what really mattered. That night he made a decision. The next morning he left his office early and drove to the community center. The children were playing outside when he arrived, and the woman was sitting under the tree, helping a little girl with her homework. When she looked up and saw him, her expression was mixed with surprise and emotion she couldn't hide. "You're here," she said quietly. "I am," he replied, "and I don't plan on leaving this time." She tried to smile, but her eyes showed concern. "You know what people will say." "I've heard enough of what people say," he said. "It's time I listen to what my heart says." Before she could respond, his son came running toward her, laughing and holding his favorite toy car. "Look, it still works," he said proudly. She smiled and knelt to his level. "That's wonderful," she said, hugging him gently. Watching the two of them together reminded him of the first moment they met. The panic, the fire, the smoke, and how that single act of courage had tied their lives together. He took a deep breath. "You saved my son," he said softly. "But you also saved me." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "You did more than you'll ever know," he replied. "Before that day, I was living without really living. Everything was about numbers, power, control. You reminded me that there's still goodness in this world." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of children's laughter filled the air, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in a soft golden hue. It felt peaceful, too peaceful to be real. After that day, he began to visit regularly again. But this time, it wasn't in secret or with hesitation. He didn't hide from the cameras or care about the whispers. He attended the events she organized, helped raise funds for better facilities, and even started programs for single parents and children in need. Slowly, the people who once judged began to see what was really happening. He didn't come to show off his wealth. He came to give something genuine. And she continued to treat him the same way she always had, with honesty, simplicity, and kindness. There were no grand gestures, just small moments that carried deep meaning. One afternoon, after a busy day at the center, they sat together on the same bench where they had first talked months ago. The sun was setting again, just like that first day. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked quietly. "In what way?" he replied. "That we came from the same world," she said. "It would be easier," he smiled. "Maybe, but if we did, I might have never met you. Maybe everything had to happen exactly as it did." She looked at him, thoughtful. "You really believe that?" "Yes," he said simply. "Because if you hadn't been there that day, I don't know if my son or I would be here right now." "That's not luck. That's fate." Her eyes softened at his words. Fate? She had never really believed in it, but somehow this felt too perfectly connected to be anything else. As time passed, their connection only deepened. He would bring his son often, and she would spend time teaching him songs, reading stories, and helping him with his little school projects. The boy adored her, and everyone around could see it. But despite the happiness growing between them, the world outside still wasn't ready to let them be. One day, an online article appeared with their photos, taken secretly during one of the charity events. The headline twisted the truth, calling her the mystery woman in the businessman's life. The story spread quickly. When she saw it, her hands trembled. She had never wanted attention, never wanted to be in the news. That evening when he came to visit, she looked upset. "It's all over the internet," she said. "People are saying things that aren't true." "I saw it," he said calmly. "Aren't you angry?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I'm done living by other people's expectations." "Let them talk. I'm not ashamed of knowing you." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from relief, because for the first time he wasn't running from what they shared. Over the next few weeks, things changed again, but in a better way. Instead of hiding, he publicly announced a new charitable foundation in her name, focused on helping children and single mothers. When reporters asked why, he simply said, "Because a brave woman reminded me what real strength looks like." The story that once tried to divide them slowly turned into one that inspired others. People began to admire her selflessness and his courage to stand by what he believed in. Donations poured in, and the small community center grew into a larger, well-equipped place for learning, care, and hope. One evening, after a long day of work, he stood by the doorway as she was locking up. The sunset behind her made her hair glow in the soft light. He walked closer, his voice gentle. "I've wanted to say something for a while." She smiled slightly. "What's stopping you?" He took a deep breath. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if life will always be this kind to us. But I know one thing. I can't imagine my world without you in it." Her heart skipped a beat. "You don't have to say that," she whispered. "I do," he said firmly. "Because I've spent my life building things that never lasted. Buildings, businesses, fame. But this, what we have, it's the only thing that feels real." She looked at him, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "You already have your world, your son, your success. You don't need me." He smiled softly. "Maybe not to complete my life, but to give it meaning. Yes, I do." Tears filled her eyes, but she laughed gently. "You always know what to say." He shook his head. "Not always. But I know when to speak from the heart." He reached for her hand, holding it for a moment, not as a grand gesture, but with quiet sincerity. It was enough to tell her everything words couldn't. From that day onward, they continued to walk their path together, sometimes quietly, sometimes facing challenges, but always side by side. The gossip eventually faded, replaced by respect. People saw how his foundation changed lives and how she remained the same humble woman who had started it all with nothing but courage. A year later, on the anniversary of the day they met, he brought her and his son back to the place where the accident had happened. The road had changed, new signs, fresh pavement, but the memory still hung in the air. Standing there, he said softly, "This was where I lost everything for a moment. And found something far greater." She smiled faintly. "It feels like a lifetime ago." He nodded. Maybe because it was the start of a new life. His son held both their hands, smiling between them. "Can we go get ice cream now?" he asked innocently. They both laughed, and in that laughter was every emotion, pain, relief, love, and gratitude. As they walked away together, she glanced back one last time at the spot where it all began. The flames were gone, the fear was gone, but the memory remained. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, something beautiful can be born, and in her heart, she knew one truth that would stay with her forever, that sometimes love doesn't arrive in grand ways. Sometimes it comes quietly, through courage, kindness, and the simple act of saving a life. He didn't just find the woman who saved his son. He found the one who saved him too. Not with fire or fame, but with a heart that never stopped believing in good. And from that day on, he never let her go.